Thanks everybody for joining us today on KRTD chat. Here with us today we have Andrew Zygmunt from Action for Assange. A lot of networks have neglected to cover Julian Assange, the trials and anything, and the ones who are covering him, like MSNBC, are covering him in an extremely negative light. And people don't know the real story about what actually happened, what's going on, and you're nobody knows what's actually happening with Julian Assange. So Andrew here is going to tell us a little bit about what's going on.
Yeah, I really appreciate you letting me come on to talk. Um, so, Action for Assange, just for starters, is a decentralized activist network. We don't have like little sub chapters necessarily. We encourage people to do what they can with the time and money that they have. Some people go out and just put posters up individually by themselves or stand on corners with signs. Every I don't know, 2 to 4 months, we hold like big national events where we crowdfund specifically and only for those. But like, for example, on April 11th, we had April 11th is the 2 year anniversary when Julian was taken to prison. And we had over 50 events in 36 countries on 5 different continents across the world. And it's essentially a leaderless movement where we come together to share information to make sure that his story gets accurately reported and then organize and activate, so to speak, in our own space. Um, but what a lot of people don't know is the history behind WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and why this trial is so important. Um, and the charges themselves start with the Iraq war logs, Afghanistan war diaries, Guantanamo Bay files, and Cablegate, which were some of the first big major headline pieces that WikiLeaks put out. And those leaks specifically that he's on trial for right now exposed his high level corruption. It showed that the US participated in war crimes that violated the Nuremberg laws, like the international laws dictating how people are allowed to wage war, as just a matter of procedure. The most notable thing that people usually remember is the Collateral murder video. And what that showed was what's called a double tap. Not only were the American troops firing on unarmed civilians, they circled back around and killed the first responders, basically a dad on his way to take his kids to school that stopped to pick up bodies in the street, like literally. And you can hear them laughing about just the carnage that they caused. And this was something that was just literally sitting on a computer file, just waiting to be released to the public. And it just took someone brave enough as Chelsea Manning to help expose that.
Now, what is now? If I'm not mistaken, there was a time where the Democratic establishment was okay with Assange and didn't care too much what he was doing.
Absolutely. And that was around these times with these leaks. And then there was what was called the Milton Report, which was like in the 2012 timeframe, which showed literally the biggest chemical spill in world history off of the coast of Africa, that the UK government barred from being reported. They put what was called a red notice out about reporting on it. And Julian Assange and WikiLeaks released the information to the public, where large institutions like The Guardian and the BBC didn't. And a lot of people can think back to the Barack Obama era, where 2010, 2011, where we talked about the Iraq war as a thing in the public, and we talked about ending Guantanamo Bay and closing its doors. And President Obama was even forced to famously say, "We tortured some folks," in a nonchalant conversation with reporters at a literal press desk. And when asked if President Obama would try Bush era war criminals, he said, "We're not interested in looking back. We're interested in looking forward." Basically saying we're interested in being war criminals too. Um, and and so you've seen that same pattern of behavior from administration after administration, where we have these continued assaults on the press. Barack Obama is infamous because he put more whistleblowers away under the Espionage Act than any other president combined, all other times combined for total uses of the Espionage Act. And then Donald Trump trumped him, right? Donald Trump put more people in jail and incarcerated more people under the Espionage Act than President Obama did, which is absolutely insane. And President Biden now right, has his first Espionage Act conviction from Daniel Hale, who exposed that the United States drone program was basically literally putting people on baseball cards and assassinating them, where they would flip through this stack of cards and pick who were they going to kill that day. And most times it was 90% the wrong targets, where they were just blowing up civilian buildings thinking that these people were inside.
So Julian Assange, there was a point where the Democratic establishment was fine with him. Then when do we get to the point where the establishment of the Democratic Party stopped being okay with Julian Assange?
Well, it was when it wasn't in favor of them. So if people can remember 2016 and the Democratic National Convention, where you had a contested convention between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. And Bernie Sanders basically ran on, I'm being cheated. These people are cheating me. They're trying to rig this election against me. And Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, not to take a side, but just to show information that they had, released the internal emails of the Democratic National Party. And what it showed is that Bernie Sanders was right, that Hillary Clinton had basically taken control of the entire Democratic institution across the country and was using it for her favor and in her power. And that's when the Democratic Party started to hate Julian. That's when Russiagate started coming out. And that's when you started seeing that total spin in the media of Julian's a Russian agent. And instead of debating and talking about what was actually in the content of the emails, people started blaming them simply on Russia in the mainstream media to divert people away from talking about it.
So Julian Assange was able to prove that Hillary Clinton was actually running the Democratic Party.
Right. And it literally fell on deaf ears for the Democratic institution. There were people screaming about it in the streets. And then you had Donald Trump stand up as the I love the WikiLeaks president, right? The president that ran on lock her up, arrest this person. She's a criminal, right? And then it turns around after he's elected and literally just does the exact same thing, but ramps up the espionage charges, puts people like Reality Winner, Joshua Schultz, Julian Assange in jail under the Espionage Act.
Definitely. Now, what is the status of Julian Assange right now? I believe he's in the UK.
Correct. He's in what's called Belmarsh Prison. It's essentially what's known as like the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom. It's located just outside of downtown London. And he's currently awaiting appeal. So on January 4th, Judge Vanessa Baratzer ruled no extradition on medical grounds, basically saying that Julian Assange would die or kill himself if sent to a U.S. prison.
Wouldn't the state of some of our prisons, I'm assuming, helped with that?
Yes.
Decision?
Yep. But she accepted every argument from the United States. She accepted that there's no more First Amendment right, that it's up to the president to decide what can and cannot be published through Espionage Act prosecutions, that the United States gains international press jurisdiction because Julian's not an American and never published from the United States. He was an Australian living in the United Kingdom, running a press outlet located that was like legally registered in Iceland. So the US is arresting a non-citizen under Espionage Act charges and claiming that the First Amendment doesn't apply. So if Julian's allowed to be prosecuted, it'll literally give the United States the power to, let's say, arrest a German man publishing information about the State Department that's living in Madagascar.
Doesn't that also open up the door for, if I publish some corruption about the United Kingdom government, they can come arrest me here?
Yep, because the precedent set that it's free reign over the globe for anyone to arrest a journalist or a whistleblower.
And I understand that Mexico has offered him asylum if he can get there.
Yep, they've actually offered, there's a man named Commander X, who's a friend of Julian, who was big during the Occupy movement, that currently has political asylum and is living in Mexico. The president of Mexico, AMLO, I don't know his full name. I think it's like a Marilel Obrador. But he offered Julian Assange political asylum. And during the case, like during Julian's actual trial back in September and February of last year, he was one of the few international leaders to speak up. And he actually met with Donald Trump multiple times. And as a community, We pressured literally every Mexican consulate and embassy around the world. I think there's like 37 or 38 of them, to ask AMLO to talk to President Trump about Julian Assange, because the Mexican labor movement is in such support of Julian that they forced the president of Mexico to come out with a statement in support of him.
Now, I'm assuming there's no way for Julian to get to Mexico as it stands right now.
As it stands right now, no. So January 4th, the judge ruled no extradition, Vanessa Breitzer, and personally ordered his release. She literally wrote, "I order the release of Julian Paul Assange," but then kept him in jail. January 6th, 2 days later, right, the day of the revolution at the Capitol, Julian Assange was denied bail. So the same judge that ruled no extradition and personally ordered his release then said, "No, we're not letting you out of jail." And the reason she gave was fairness to the United States, right? That the United States should have their chance to appeal. So even though Julian won his extradition proceedings, even if this could be taken as a serious legal process, get put on house arrest. Instead, they're still just keeping him in prison 24 hours a day in isolation.
So what happens if the United States appeal gets thrown out?
So if the United States appeal gets thrown out, there's still that legal precedent that the UK agreed to with the ability to have international jurisdiction over the press. Okay. So even if the UK court rejects the appeal from the US on the medical grounds, that legal precedent may still stand. So it's super weird and complicated, but there's this process called a cross appeal that will allow Julian and his legal team to directly appeal what the judge accepted. So the US is currently in the process of appealing the medical portion that the judge ruled no extradition on. And Julian's legal team is in the process of appealing all of the assaults on free speech that the judge accepted in the legal arguments on January 4th.
So what's the best case scenario for Julian in this case? What needs to happen?
The best worst case scenario would be the charges get dropped. Okay. If the charges just get dropped completely, it doesn't solve the issues like Julian being tortured for a decade. It doesn't put any of the war criminals in jail that were exposed, but it gets the precedent out of international law.
For you, Julian, if that happens.
Hopefully. So the scary part, right, at the end of the court trial on January 6th, when the judge declined to release Julian pending appeal, she basically said that Julian could be charged under the Official Secrets Act in the UK. And that's their equivalent of the Espionage Act. It's basically the law that they use to arrest whistleblowers that expose government corruption and things like that. It's their classified information protection law.
And as we talked about before, a lot of media outlets don't want to touch this story. Mm-hmm. Progressive outlets, mainstream outlets, none of them want to touch this story. Even nobody wants to put their hands in the story.
Yep. And it's because there's this idea of the chilling effect, right? That when they target someone, whether it be a whistleblower or a publisher, that other publishers see that, and instead of feeling verbose and saying, "I will defend that person regardless of political belief," they say, "Oh shit, I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to face an Espionage Act charge." So they don't talk about Julian's situation, but they also don't talk about national security information or talk about issues of war and peace, for example. To
their credit, I saw MSNBC cover it, but not to their credit, the coverage I've seen them do of it accuses Julian Assange of being a criminal the way they talk about his trial.
Mm-hmm. And that's the shame of it, because it's actually illegal for the United States government to go as far as to make a dossier, to write in, to literally write an internal report on a journalist. That's illegal, right? And our government has spent millions of dollars and over a decade attacking this journalist. One of the horrifying things, there's this case in Spain called the UC Global trial, And while Julian was in the embassy, the Ecuadorian government employed a private security company called UC Global. And UC Global was tasked with protecting the embassy. Their owner, Spanish citizen David Morales, partnered up with Sheldon Adelson of the Sands Casino in Las Vegas and one of Trump's largest donors to
Mm-hmm.
turn that security effort at the Ecuadorian embassy in London into a spying effort where they literally were plotting plans to poison Julian. They developed, which is how they arrested him, which was called Project Pegasus or Pelican. I'm sorry, Project Pelican. And the only reason we know about this is because they went as far as to get the security contractors to steal diapers out of garbage cans to see if children were Julian Assange's babies. Like they wanted to DNA test the poop in the diapers. And one of the contractors there had such a crisis of faith that he said, I can't do this anymore. He's like, I'm not going to watch them spy on him. So he came forward, and that's how we have any of the charges even going on in Spain right now, is because we know that UC Global was literally stealing diapers and plotting to assassinate Julian.
Now, even if they let him go, there's no chance the United States won't try to do something anyway.
Correct. And that's the scary part, is even if he does get set free, where does he go to avoid international surveillance? Like we know from the Edward Snowden releases of an intelligence operation called the Five Eyes, which is Canada, the United States, England, New Zealand, and Australia, that all spy on each other's citizens and share national security information. So that way they aren't violating their own national laws, but can still have domestic surveillance on every citizen.
Interesting. And now you sent in some pictures. I want to have our producer pull those up, and I want to, if you could tell everybody about these pictures.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's pull up some pictures.
You disabled screen sharing.
Okay, momentarily we will pull up some pictures. There we go. All right. So
this is us outside of the Department of Justice. And this was April 11th. This was on the 2-year anniversary of Julian Assange being imprisoned. We'd actually been out there. I think we've been on the ground outside there for a total of 5 weeks over the last 18 months outside of the DOJ. So this was probably our 5th or 6th time going out there. And this was also on April 11th. This is outside of the Ecuadorian embassy in Washington, D.C. This was just as we arrived and are getting setting up banners outside of it. And I think in the next picture, you can see the view of the van that came through. Because we usually have this one, this is from January. So after the no extradition ruling, we had already planned on being outside of the Justice Department. So we literally got to plant the WikiLeaks flag outside of the Justice Department as a symbol of victory. And then this is that same, this is actually from our Clovers for Assange events outside of the Department of Justice. So this picture is coming in from St. Patrick's Day or the day after, where we did a International Day of Action on St. Patrick's Day for what we called Clovers for Assange, because the Free Assange community on Twitter and Facebook use the little 4-leaf clover icon in their name to help identify each other about 2 years ago. So we turned it from a digital hashtag sending Julian some luck on St. Patrick's Day to an in-person protest in under a year. So that was a really exciting thing to be able to pull off. And then so we did a march on St. Patrick's Day. And we have a billboard truck that follows around, which is what you see up right there. But we had almost 70 of us that went from Fox News to the CNN building and then to the Google building in Washington, D.C. This was probably one of my favorite events, to be honest, because we literally got to march through the streets chanting "fuck the CIA." So that was a really enjoyable time. Very, very therapeutic. And then this is just another shot from that march as we were going to the Google building. And then this was in January of this year. This was us gathered outside of the British Embassy. And so the way this is set up, the way the embassy is set up, you have the British Embassy right here, and the parking lot that's next to it shares a plot with the Vice President's mansion. So we showed up about an hour early, right as Mike Pence in January was leaving one Sunday morning, about an hour before our protest was scheduled to begin. So we got to, before this picture was taken, we got to literally shout down Mike Pence as he was driving out of the president's mansion. So that was a lot of fun. But this event actually was focused primarily on journalism, where most of the people that you see in that picture are independent journalists themselves and their families that turned out. I think we had a total of about 60 people out that day, and 45 of them were journalists that were there filming our action, but also speaking out in support of Julian Assange.
Yes, very nice. Now, in the Congress or in the Senate, do you have anyone who publicly supports the release of Julian Assange, or have people either said they don't support it or have just stayed silent?
So before 2021, we had, this was back in 2020, we had Tulsi Gabbard and Thomas Massie, a Democrat and a Republican, that put three bills forward in support of pardoning Julian, dropping the charges, pardoning Edward Snowden, and basically walking back the Espionage Act, making it so that way there's a public interest defense and whistleblower restrictions, so that way whistleblowers, but also publishers, couldn't be processed or prosecuted under it.
Okay.
But you have people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who, when asked directly, do you support Julian, came out with a wishy-washy statement that said, well, that situation's complicated. But then you had someone like Sarah Palin, who personally had her emails released by WikiLeaks in 2008, right? Had her emails published. Came out and said Julian shouldn't be prosecuted, that what they're doing to him is hideous, that he exposed corruption around the world. So
you're getting bipartisan support on this issue.
Right. And it pulls the curtain off too, right? So if you follow Julian, the existence of WikiLeaks essentially has been what I would consider like a barometer on global tyranny, essentially judging the pressure that state and institutional power are putting against citizens in the working class. And you have essentially the entire world 7 years behind where Julian Assange was. We had, what was it, in 2012, Julian Assange was forced into the embassy and into house arrest. And now we have global lockdowns now that Julian's in prison and unable to publish, that have put the majority of the world under house arrest. So there was this little saying that a lot of places and a lot of people have used through time, but we like to say that we are all Assange, that Julian wasn't, that they're not after Julian, but Julian was the one who threw his body on the gears of a machine designed to kill all of us in hopes that we could rise up to stop it.
Definitely. Now, which media outlets have given this attention?
There's a lot of independent media outlets that are worth a salt. The Gray Zone does a really good job. Jimmy Dore does an excellent job. Richard Medhurst does a really great job covering it. I have a friend of mine who is one of my co-founders for Action for Assange that does international updates for Activism Munich. And has basically got the nation of Germany up in arms. Like there's 7 events that happen every single week in Germany in support of Julian across the country. But the only real major media institution, like mainstream outlet that's covering it, is Tucker Carlson.
Really?
He's talked about it with Jimmy Dore multiple times. He's had Glenn Greenwald on to discuss it. And back on April 9th, I was actually fortunate enough to go on Tucker Carlson myself to talk about it.
Interesting. While he may have nefarious motives for it, at least he's giving it coverage.
Absolutely, because that's ultimately what matters. And it was actually crazy. Like going on that show that's probably my worst interview I've ever done. I had like 4 pages of notes in front of me, and like my brain just went blank. So it's
And how long did he have you for the interview? It was like a 2-minute thing?
yeah, it was like 2.5, 3 minutes. It was pretty short. And halfway through, my earpiece fell out, so I couldn't even hear what he was saying. It was terrible. But I just appreciated being on there and getting coverage because this is such an important issue that literally it's only Tucker in mainstream media giving him any beneficial coverage.
Nobody else on Fox or any other outlets have done anything.
No, the most you get is the MSNBC team that refers to him as the WikiLeaks guy, or
Yes.
will dig up old smears like the Sweden charges were like he's a rapist. The Sweden allegations, they were never charges, sorry, but the fake rape charges that they tried to put on him.
Of course. Now, I just have one personal question. How does Fox do their interviews? Do they use Skype? Do they use Zoom? I'm just curious.
It was in studio actually. So I got to Washington D.C. That Friday afternoon, the afternoon of the 9th, and I had to go to the Fox building in Washington D.C. that I had protested outside of 3 times to go up to a studio. It was actually pretty freaky, right? So there was one lady at the front desk that was like, "Yeah, go take those elevators and go to floor 3." And so I go up there. It's like a half lit floor. There's no one on it, no receptionist desk. And I'm like, someone's gonna kill me. Like I'm walking into some kind of trap. But it was like a private studio room in like one of the back wings of a collective media building. It has Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and C-SPAN all crammed into the same recording studios, essentially.
That's funny that they all do the show from the same place.
Right. Right. You'd think that they'd be diametrically opposed to one another, but they all share the same building.
Well, they all share a lot of this. They all share a lot of the same beliefs, believe it or not. So
Oh yeah, absolutely.
now, TYT did not give this too much coverage.
Correct. And TYT affiliates, right? So you had Anna Kasparian back in January get shamed into covering the trial of Julian Assange. Literally, like Max Blumenthal had to go as far as to call her out for not covering this. But even people like the Kyle Kalinskis of the world and Mike Figueredo's over at Humanist Report, at best will give it 7 minutes of surface level coverage. Where they say, yeah, Julian's facing 18 charges under the Espionage Act. This is a really bad thing. Chelsea Manning exposed all of these leaks, blah, 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 end of video. So even when the TYT affiliate creators make a video, it's very surface level, very short, and it happens, I don't know, every like 3 to 6 months at best, whenever our community can get enough attention put on one of them to shame them into doing it.
You know, if this happened in 2008 or 2010, TYT would be all over this and they'd be covering it like crazy.
Oh, if this happened in 2010, the whole world would be up in arms. Like that's the craziest. That's why I literally have given up my life for the last 2 years to do this, because April 11th, 2019, Julian Assange gets arrested. I show up in Washington, D.C. at the British Embassy April 12th at 9:30 at night. I message Lee Camp and I'm like, hey, where's all the protesters at? Like, where's everybody at? And he was like, oh, I think they went home around like 8:30 or 9 o'clock. And I'm like the world should be burning. Like everyone should be up in arms that this man, this hero of every and any political faction, is being persecuted, right? Like if there's an issue that you fought for, Julian Assange has exposed corruption about it. Whether it's a left-wing issue or a right-wing issue. So to see in 2010, when they tried to arrest Julian, literally the city of London shut down with protest, compared to 2019 when there was barely a whistle. And that's when I personally knew I had to do something. So that's when me and one of my friends that I met through the Anonymous Bites Back podcast started organizing Action for Assange. And it's just all about encouraging people to do what they can with the time and money that they have,
How
because
many active members do you have that of Action for Assange right now?
so of our like internal organizing community, there's probably about 12 of us that regularly meet. As
So
far as
like,
other, as
if you
far
were
as
to do a protest, how many of you guys would show up?
So we did protest in LA on April 11th, and we had over 80 people show up, while at the same time in Washington, D.C., we had about 30 to 40. And that was just our two groups. And then there was 11 or 12 other international Assange groups that aren't like Action for Assange groups. We had Tampa, we had Tulsa, we
Do you
had
coordinate
New
with
York,
any
San
of these other
Francisco.
Assange groups?
Yeah, so the way we organize is just begging people to organize. And then when a group starts up, we just encourage them and support them, but we don't tell them what to do. We don't tell people, hey, this is what you need to say. These are your signs.
Coordination, and you guys will do protests together.
Right. And like we have a group that's in Washington, D.C. right now. And so when we go to do a big event, we'll say, hey, we'd like to work with you to help make this event happen. But it's all about having all power be at the local levels. We're just literally people that are willing to train, essentially. Like we're as a group
Hey, Julian,
trying to get other
any
activists
coverage?
equipped to handle this.
You mentioned Lee Camp a minute ago. Is he giving this any coverage?
Yeah, I actually back in the end of 2019, I want to say it was like December
Hmm.
2019 or January 2020. I was on an episode of Redacted Tonight for an interview with him, but he's one of the few people that aggressively and regularly cover Julian Assange's case.
Isn't it interesting how the comedians have replaced the journalists?
It's pretty funny, no pun intended.
So you're getting some coverage on this now, but it's still going to be an uphill battle to get anything done with Assange right now.
Absolutely. But the thing that we like to say is that the no extradition ruling is essentially the beachhead at Normandy, right? So it's not the final victory, and even getting Julian out of prison doesn't inherently magic wand solve all the problems of the world. But that no extradition ruling shows that the beast we're all fighting, which is centralized state power, can be defeated, and that all it takes is public pressure and public awareness to make it happen. And so that's something that I'm hopeful for, because like we talked about earlier, there's this idea of the chilling effect, right? The journalists won't cover stories because other journalists got prosecuted. But I like the idea of the boiling effect, right? Like what happens once the heat's turned up enough that Julian Assange is forced out of prison because of public pressure. And when the United States is forced to say in court, you can release classified information. You know, what kind of upswell in journalism will we see when that happens?
And where do you stand on Edward Snowden? I know you're an Action for Assange group, but I do want to ask that question.
Oh, I support any whistleblower, anyone who exposes anything, whether it's information I like or don't like. I think that what he exposed is absolutely critical to having a democratic society. But I think he should be pardoned. I don't know if he should come back to the United States, because I wouldn't trust that for anything.
Well,
But
I don't know if I would come back after that.
right, but at least pardoning him and giving him his passport so he can go to whatever country he chooses would be nice.
Exactly. And the government isn't happy with what you've been doing.
Yeah, no, it's so we get pushback in a lot of different ways, right? So Julian Assange is such a censored term that Google Chrome removed it from their dictionary. So like if you go to type in a Word document, Assange or anything like that, it puts a squiggly red line and says this word's spelled wrong. So we smash up against censorship walls on a regular basis. But that's the whole point, because we have enough friends in the independent media that even while we yell and scream into essentially what feels like a vacuum, we've managed to more or less radicalize the Free Assange community into taking individual action, which was the entire goal.
And And what are the next steps? Let's say you succeed. What do you do now? So you've succeeded. Assange is released from prison. He makes it over to Mexico or whatever. What do you do now?
So the hope then, right, is we have an international community of people actively paying attention to national security law. So we use that as a way to continue to overturn the Espionage Act and get that removed and get rid of the Patriot Act, for example, and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Because just because Julian is allowed to go free doesn't mean that he'll remain free, and doesn't mean that they won't try it again with someone else 10 years from now that they'll be allowed to arrest. So the hope is to attack these laws head on. But personally, right, once we can secure press freedom for 50 years, my individual goal is to be able to reform the 13th Amendment to completely abolish slavery instead of allowing it in prisons. So that's my personal goal once we're able to accurately share corruption and expose information.
Have you been listening to the former presidential candidate Mark Charles? He talked a lot about that.
I actually did. Mark Charles was someone that I followed on YouTube pretty extensively. I would always pop into his live streams and say hi and ask him to talk about Julian.
Definitely. So, and I'm assuming he supported the freedom of Julian Assange.
I don't know if he talked. I've never seen him talk about it directly, even through all the times that I reached out to him. But I don't want to say that he would or wouldn't. Because he's someone that I'm sure once you explain the situation to him, he'd be like, yeah, I absolutely support that guy, just from the nature of the other things he talks about. But I wouldn't want to.
No, of course. And we'll be sure to ask him the next time he's on our show.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
So, is there anything you want our viewers to know about how to get involved with Action for Assange, what they can do themselves to help, anything else?
Yeah. So what we ask is that people find in their own way and their own time how to take action, whether it's going to a city council meeting and asking your city council people to speak up in support of Julian, whether it's sending a letter to the president or a congressperson, whether it's like me and you go out and put signs on telephone poles, or spray paint free Julian Assange on sidewalks. And so literally whatever in your space, in your time, and with your resources you can do, I would encourage people to do, because there's tons of political organizers that are completely disenfranchised. And I think getting just a startup group somewhere that is like, hey, I know how to organize a phone bank. Let me organize a phone bank for Julian Assange. Hey, I have 10 friends that regularly go out and knock on doors about food security issues locally. Let's also see if we can have them hand out a flyer about Julian Assange. So it's finding spaces like that where we can talk about major issues like Julian, because it doesn't start and end with him. But it's something that if we lose the battle, then at that point the war's almost over, because whether you're fighting for Medicare for all, whether you're fighting to expose pipelines and environmental corruption, or fighting against police brutality, having the ability to expose firsthand information is the basis of all of those fights.
Definitely. And where can people find out more about Action for Assange?
So we have our website, action4assange.com. If you go on YouTube and just type in Action for Assange, you can find us there. And then on Twitter, it's action_4Assange.
Okay, that sounds good. Do you have any final statements?
No, I really appreciate you bringing me on to talk about this. There's not many people willing to cover the issue in depth like this, so I greatly thank you for it.
Of course. Stay for a minute after the stream. I want to ask you a question, and we can end now. Thanks, everyone.